When Rebecca Hartwell purchased a crumbling 1880s homestead at a county foreclosure auction for $47,000, she never imagined that restoring the abandoned property would lead her to discover the long-lost journal of notorious Wild West outlaw Black Jack Morrison, revealing the exact location of his hidden silver mine worth over $20 million, and transforming her from a desperate single mother facing eviction into one of Montana's most successful treasure hunters. Before we dive into this incredible story, let us know what state you're watching from in the comments. And if this story amazes you, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we've got another mind-blowing story about a construction worker who found a Civil War treasure that changed his family's destiny forever. At 34 years old, Rebecca Hartwell was counting down the final days before her landlord's eviction notice would force her and her 12-year-old son Marcus out of their cramped apartment in Billings, Montana. As she sat at her kitchen table surrounded by rejection letters from every job application she had submitted over the past 6 months, medical bills from Marcus's recent surgery that insurance had refused to cover, and a final notice from her apartment complex demanding $4,800 in back rent that she had no way of producing before the February 15th deadline that was now just 8 days away. The certified letter from Mountain View Apartments lay open beside her coffee cup like a death sentence, its corporate letterhead reducing 3 years of on-time payments and responsible tenancy to a series of legal procedures and eviction timelines. Notice of termination of tenancy for non-payment of rent, the header declared in bold red letters, followed by the devastating mathematics of single motherhood during economic hardship. $1,600 monthly rent that had become impossible to maintain. After losing her position as a medical billing coordinator, when the rural clinic where she worked had closed due to budget cuts affecting healthcare facilities throughout rural Montana. Rebecca's monthly unemployment benefits of $1,240 were insufficient to cover even basic housing costs, let alone the additional expenses of raising Marcus as a single mother in an economic environment where entry-level positions were scarce and competition for available jobs was fierce among displaced workers throughout the region. The medical bills from Marcus's emergency appendectomy in December had consumed their modest savings and created debt obligations that made their financial situation increasingly desperate with each passing week. Marcus had been born with a rare kidney condition that required ongoing medical monitoring and occasional emergency interventions that generated healthcare costs far beyond what Rebecca's former employer-sponsored insurance had covered. The boy's medical needs had prevented Rebecca from pursuing employment opportunities that required extensive travel or irregular schedules, limiting her job prospects to positions within commuting distance of Billings and compatible with the school schedule and medical appointments that structured their daily routine. The apartment eviction notice represented not just the loss of their current housing, but the potential destruction of the stability that Rebecca had worked desperately to maintain for Marcus, despite the challenges of single parenthood and the financial pressures that had intensified since losing her healthcare industry position 6 months earlier. Rebecca's divorce from Marcus's father had been finalized 3 years earlier, when David's gambling addiction and financial irresponsibility had made it impossible to maintain a household budget or provide the security that Marcus needed during his elementary school years. David's child support payments of $400 monthly were sporadic and unreliable, arriving only when his construction work in Wyoming provided sufficient income, and when his gambling debts didn't consume his earnings before he could fulfill his parental obligations. The irregular nature of David's financial contributions had forced Rebecca to budget based solely on her own income, while treating any child support payments as unexpected bonuses rather than reliable components of their monthly financial planning. Rebecca's employment search had been complicated by the specialized nature of her healthcare administration experience and the limited number of medical facilities in rural Montana that required her specific skill set. The clinic where she had worked for 5 years had provided stable income and benefits that had allowed her to create a comfortable middle-class lifestyle for Marcus, while building modest savings that had provided financial security until the facility's closure had eliminated her position and benefits simultaneously. The job market in Billings and surrounding communities offered primarily service industry positions with hourly wages insufficient to cover housing costs that had increased significantly over the past 2 years as population growth had outpaced housing development throughout the region. Rebecca had applied for positions ranging from administrative assistant roles to retail management, but her healthcare industry background had made her overqualified for entry-level positions, while her lack of experience in other industries had made her less competitive for supervisory roles that offered adequate compensation. The prospect of homelessness was creating anxiety symptoms in both Rebecca and Marcus that were affecting their sleep, their appetites, and their ability to maintain normal routines, while uncertainty about their housing situation dominated their daily conversations and planning decisions. Marcus had begun having nightmares about living in their car, often waking up at 3 a.m., asking whether they would have to leave Montana and whether he would have to change schools and leave his friends behind. Rebecca had developed stress-related headaches that made it difficult to concentrate during job interviews, creating a cycle of decreased performance that was undermining her efforts to secure employment that could solve their housing crisis before the eviction deadline. The psychological impact of chronic financial stress was also affecting Marcus's academic performance and social development, as the 12-year-old struggled to focus on schoolwork while worrying about family stability and his uncertain future. The apartment that had been their home for 3 years represented everything that was at stake in their current crisis. The 2-bedroom unit in a family-friendly complex had provided Marcus with his own space, proximity to his elementary school, and a sense of normalcy that Rebecca had worked desperately to maintain, despite the challenges of single parenthood and the financial pressures that had characterized their lives since her divorce. Marcus's bedroom contained his collection of model airplanes, his books about aviation history, and the computer setup that he used for both schoolwork and his hobby of researching World War II aircraft and military history. The 12-year-old had developed an impressive knowledge of aviation technology and military strategy through his independent reading and online research, often surprising adults with his detailed understanding of historical events and technical specifications of military equipment. Rebecca's own bedroom served as both personal space and home office, where she conducted her job search, managed their finances, and attempted to create solutions for problems that seemed to exceed her available resources and options. The living room where they watched movies together and where Marcus completed his homework had become the center of family life that provided stability and routine during a period when external circumstances were creating constant uncertainty. The kitchen where Rebecca had taught Marcus to cook simple meals and where they shared breakfast each morning before school represented the domestic normalcy that she was determined to preserve despite their current financial crisis. The routines and traditions that they had established in this apartment had created a sense of home that transcended the economic challenges that were now threatening their housing security. But the eviction notice had transformed their comfortable apartment into a countdown clock that was ticking toward homelessness with mathematical precision that left no room for optimism or delay. Rebecca had exhausted every resource available to single mothers and displaced workers in Montana, applying for emergency assistance programs through the State Department of Social Services, housing assistance programs through local nonprofits, and emergency rent relief programs that had waiting lists extending months beyond their immediate deadline. The Montana Emergency Rental Assistance Program had placed Rebecca on a waiting list with an estimated processing time of 12 to 16 weeks for families that weren't facing immediate eviction, making their assistance unavailable for addressing her February 15th deadline. Local churches and community organizations had provided Rebecca with food assistance and vouchers for utilities, but lacked resources for emergency rent assistance that could address the $4,800 that she owed to avoid eviction. Rebecca had also explored employment opportunities outside of Billings, but the costs of relocating and the disruption to Marcus's medical care and schooling had made distant job opportunities impractical given their current financial resources and his ongoing healthcare needs. The specialized nature of Marcus's kidney condition required continuity of care with pediatric nephrology specialists who were familiar with his medical history and treatment requirements. The prospect of leaving Montana and Marcus's established medical team would create health risks that outweighed the potential benefits of employment opportunities in other states where Rebecca might be able to find healthcare administration positions with adequate compensation and benefits. The boy's medical needs had to remain the primary consideration in any decisions about relocation or major life changes that could affect his access to specialized healthcare. Rebecca's parents had retired to Florida 5 years earlier and lacked the financial resources to provide assistance beyond occasional grocery money and emotional support during their weekly phone conversations. Her mother's fixed retirement income and her father's ongoing medical expenses from diabetes complications had eliminated their ability to provide financial assistance for emergencies that exceeded their own modest budget constraints. Rebecca's sister lived in Seattle with her own young family and was struggling with mortgage payments and childcare costs that prevented her from offering more than moral support and occasional small gifts for Marcus during holidays and birthdays. The geographic distance and economic pressures affecting both families had limited their ability to provide mutual assistance during financial emergencies. The isolation of their current crisis was intensified by Rebecca's pride and her reluctance to burden friends and extended family members with requests for financial assistance that she might not be able to repay within reasonable timeframes. Her determination to solve their problems through her own efforts reflected values of self-reliance and personal responsibility that had shaped her approach to single parenthood and financial management throughout the 3 years since her divorce. As Rebecca sat at her kitchen table on this cold February morning, calculating whether selling their few valuable possessions might generate enough cash to pay a portion of their back rent and negotiate an extension with their landlord, she was also researching alternative housing options that might be affordable within her current financial constraints, while still providing Marcus with stability and access to his medical care and educational needs. The classified advertisements in the Billings Gazette had revealed a housing market where available rental properties were either too expensive for her budget or located in neighborhoods where Marcus's safety and educational opportunities would be compromised. The few affordable options were either temporary arrangements or properties with conditions that made them unsuitable for long-term residence with a child who had ongoing medical needs. But Rebecca Hartwell had no idea that within days her desperate search for affordable housing would lead her to a county foreclosure auction where she would make a purchase decision that seemed financially reckless but would ultimately provide the key to discovering historical treasures that would solve not only their immediate housing crisis, but create opportunities for wealth and adventure that would exceed anything she had imagined possible during her years of struggling to maintain stability as a single mother in rural Montana. The foreclosure auction that would change Rebecca's life was advertised in the legal notices section of the Billings Gazette as a routine disposal of properties that had been seized by Yellowstone County for unpaid taxes, with no indication that one of the listed properties contained historical secrets that had been waiting over 140 years for someone with the curiosity and determination to uncover the extraordinary legacy of one of the American West's most notorious outlaws and his hidden fortune in silver. Rebecca's impossible financial mathematics had begun 6 months earlier when the Riverside Family Clinic announced its permanent closure due to state budget cuts that were eliminating funding for rural healthcare facilities throughout Montana, leaving 23 employees without jobs and forcing patients to travel over 80 miles to access basic medical services. The clinic's closure had terminated not only Rebecca's $3,800 monthly salary as their senior medical billing coordinator, but also the comprehensive health insurance benefits that had covered Marcus's ongoing kidney treatments and the prescription medications that managed his rare nephropathy condition. The timing of the clinic closure had been particularly devastating because it occurred just 2 weeks before Marcus's scheduled quarterly consultation with the pediatric nephrology team at Billings Children's Hospital, forcing Rebecca to pay $2,400 out of pocket for medical appointments and diagnostic tests that would have been fully covered under her former employer's insurance plan. The loss of healthcare benefits had also eliminated access to the specialty pharmacy network that had provided Marcus's medications at reduced costs, increasing their monthly prescription expenses from $89 to $547 for medications that were essential for managing his kidney function. Rebecca's unemployment benefits calculation was based on her previous year's earnings, but the $1,240 monthly payments represented only 60% of her former net income and included no provision for the healthcare benefits that had been crucial for managing Marcus's medical expenses. The unemployment insurance system was designed for temporary income replacement during brief job searches, not for supporting families with ongoing medical needs during extended periods of economic hardship in regions where suitable employment opportunities were scarce. The medical bills from Marcus's December emergency appendectomy had consumed the $8,400 in savings that Rebecca had accumulated during her 5 years of stable employment at the clinic, while creating additional debt obligations totaling $12,600. That exceeded anything she could manage with unemployment benefits and sporadic child support payments. The emergency surgery had required a 3-day hospital stay, followed by 2 weeks of recovery that had prevented Rebecca from pursuing employment opportunities during November and December, when several positions had become available in the regional healthcare system. Marcus's appendectomy had been complicated by his underlying kidney condition, requiring additional monitoring and specialized care that had extended his recovery period and increased the medical costs beyond what standard appendectomy procedures typically involved. The pediatric surgeons had needed to coordinate with his nephrology team to ensure that the surgical procedures and post-operative medications wouldn't interfere with his kidney treatments or compromise his ongoing medical management. The hospital billing department had structured Rebecca's payment obligations as a series of monthly installments requiring $420 per month for 3 years. Payments that were impossible to maintain with her current income, while also covering housing costs, utilities, groceries, and Marcus's ongoing medical expenses. Rebecca had attempted to negotiate reduced payment plans with the hospital's financial assistance office, but their income requirements for indigent care programs were based on federal poverty guidelines that didn't account for the medical expenses that consumed a significant portion of her available income. Rebecca's apartment rent of $1,600 monthly had been manageable when she was earning $3,800 from the clinic, but represented over 125% of her unemployment benefits, creating an unsustainable housing cost burden that had forced her to deplete her savings to maintain their residence while searching for employment that could restore their financial stability. The apartment complex's management company had initially agreed to accept partial rent payments during Rebecca's first 3 months of unemployment, but had begun eviction proceedings when her job search had extended beyond their 90-day accommodation period. The regional job market for healthcare administration professionals had been severely impacted by the closure of 3 rural medical facilities within a 6-month period, creating competition among experienced medical billing coordinators and insurance specialists for a limited number of available positions at the remaining healthcare facilities throughout south-central Montana. Rebecca's experience and qualifications were excellent, but the supply of qualified candidates had exceeded demand in a specialized field where positions typically became available only when existing employees retired or relocated to other regions. Rebecca had applied for 47 different positions since losing her job at the clinic, including administrative roles at hospitals in Bozeman and Great Falls that would have required Marcus to change schools and medical providers, but even these opportunities had attracted dozens of qualified applicants from throughout the region who were facing similar employment challenges due to healthcare industry consolidation and budget constraints affecting rural medical facilities. The few job interviews that Rebecca had secured had been positive experiences where her qualifications and experience had impressed hiring managers, but budget limitations and hiring freezes had prevented these opportunities from resulting in job offers that could address her immediate financial needs. 2 positions had been eliminated during the interview process when hospital administrators had decided to redistribute responsibilities among existing staff, rather than hiring additional personnel during a period of economic uncertainty. Rebecca's employment search had been further complicated by the need to maintain Marcus's medical appointment schedule and her availability for school conferences and activities that were important for his academic and social development. Her commitment to being an involved parent had always been a priority, but the constraints of single parenthood had made it challenging to pursue employment opportunities that required extensive travel or irregular schedules that might conflict with Marcus's needs. The stress of prolonged unemployment and financial insecurity had begun affecting Rebecca's performance during job interviews, creating anxiety symptoms that made it difficult for her to present herself with the confidence and competence that had characterized her professional demeanor during her years of stable employment. The psychological pressure of knowing that each failed interview brought them closer to homelessness had created a cycle of decreased performance that was undermining her ability to secure the employment that could solve their housing crisis. Marcus had begun asking increasingly specific questions about their financial situation and their housing security, demonstrating the intelligence and maturity that made him an exceptional 12-year-old, but also revealing the stress that their uncertain circumstances were creating for a child who needed stability and predictability during a crucial period of his academic and emotional development. His questions about whether they might have to move away from Montana and whether his medical treatments would be interrupted had forced Rebecca to balance honesty about their challenges with reassurance that she was working to solve their problems. The boy's interest in military history and aviation had intensified during the months of financial stress, perhaps as a way of escaping into subjects that provided intellectual stimulation and historical perspective during a period when their immediate circumstances were dominated by uncertainty and anxiety. Marcus had developed encyclopedic knowledge about World War II aircraft specifications, battle strategies, and historical figures that impressed adults and provided him with a sense of expertise and control in areas where his age and circumstances didn't limit his ability to excel. Rebecca's own coping mechanisms during their financial crisis had included obsessive research into every available resource for assistance, employment opportunity, and alternative solution that might address their housing and income needs. Her systematic approach to problem-solving had served her well during her healthcare administration career, but the complexity of their current situation exceeded what individual effort and careful planning could address without external assistance or unexpected opportunities. The eviction notice had transformed their housing crisis from a manageable challenge into an urgent emergency that required immediate solutions within a time frame that eliminated gradual approaches or long-term strategies. The 8-day deadline before eviction proceedings would begin had compressed all of Rebecca's decision-making into a narrow window that forced her to consider options that might have seemed too risky or impractical under less desperate circumstances. Rebecca's credit score had remained excellent throughout their financial difficulties because she had prioritized making minimum payments on her credit cards and avoiding late payments that would damage her ability to secure employment or housing in the future. Her financial responsibility during the crisis had preserved her creditworthiness while depleting her available cash resources, creating a situation where she had access to credit but lacked the income necessary to take on additional debt obligations that would require monthly payments. The apartment eviction would damage her rental history and make it extremely difficult to secure alternative housing, even if she could find employment that provided sufficient income for rent deposits and monthly payments. The eviction record would appear on background checks for 7 years, limiting her housing options to properties that accepted tenants with negative rental history or required larger security deposits that would be impossible for her to provide with her current financial resources. Rebecca had calculated that even if she could secure employment immediately, the time required for her first paycheck would extend beyond the eviction deadline, making it necessary to find interim solutions that could provide temporary housing. While she transitioned back to stable employment and rebuilt their financial security, the complexity of coordinating employment, housing, and Marcus's medical care during a transition period had made it clear that conventional solutions were insufficient for addressing their immediate crisis. The classified advertisements that Rebecca had been studying with increasing desperation included not only rental properties and employment opportunities, but also legal notices and auction announcements that represented potential alternatives to traditional housing and employment solutions. Her systematic review of every possible option had led her to notice foreclosure auction listings that typically attracted real estate investors, but might also provide opportunities for families seeking affordable housing in unconventional circumstances. The legal notice section of the Billings Gazette had become part of Rebecca's daily reading, as she searched for any information that might reveal opportunities or resources that could address their housing needs within their extremely limited budget constraints. The foreclosure auction scheduled for February 12th included several properties with starting bids that were within the range of what Rebecca might be able to finance through credit cards or small personal loans if she could identify a property that offered potential for immediate occupancy and long-term value. But Rebecca had no idea that her desperate search for affordable housing alternatives would lead her to make a purchase decision that seemed financially reckless, but would ultimately provide access to historical discoveries that had been waiting over a century for someone with the curiosity and determination to uncover the extraordinary secrets hidden within the walls and grounds of an abandoned homestead that had once sheltered one of the American West's most notorious outlaws, and his treasure that would transform her family's desperate circumstances into opportunities for adventure and wealth that exceeded anything she had imagined possible during her months of unemployment and financial struggle. The story of Rebecca's desperate housing search was rooted in a legacy of resilience and determination that had shaped 3 generations of Hartwell women who had built successful lives through education, hard work, and an unwavering commitment to providing better opportunities for their children, despite facing economic challenges that had tested their resourcefulness and character throughout decades of American social and economic transformation. Rebecca's grandmother, Dorothy Hartwell, had been born in 1932 during the Great Depression to a family of wheat farmers in eastern Montana who had lost their land to bank foreclosures and drought conditions that had devastated agricultural communities throughout the Great Plains. Dorothy had grown up in a series of rental houses and temporary arrangements, while her parents sought employment in towns and cities where economic opportunities existed for displaced farming families who had lost everything during the economic collapse that had reshaped rural America. Despite the instability of her childhood, Dorothy had excelled academically and had become the first person in her family to attend college, earning a teaching degree from Montana State University in 1954 through a combination of academic scholarships, part-time employment, and determination that had carried her through 4 years of financial hardship and academic challenges. Her teaching career had spanned 35 years in rural Montana schools, where she had educated children from farming and ranching families while raising her own daughter as a single mother after her husband's death in a mining accident in 1961. Dorothy's commitment to education and her belief that knowledge and skills provided security that economic circumstances couldn't destroy had shaped her approach to raising Rebecca's mother, Janet, who had inherited her mother's academic abilities, and her determination to create stability through professional achievement and careful financial planning. Janet had earned a nursing degree in 1978 and had built a successful career in hospital administration that had provided middle-class security for her own family while demonstrating the value of education and professional competence. Janet's marriage to Robert Hartwell in 1980 had created a partnership that combined her healthcare expertise with his skills as a mechanical engineer, providing Rebecca with a childhood characterized by economic stability, educational opportunities, and family values that emphasized hard work, personal responsibility, and the importance of helping others during times of crisis. The Hartwell household had been a place where academic achievement was celebrated, where financial responsibility was modeled, and where community service was considered an essential component of personal character. Rebecca had grown up understanding that education was the foundation of economic security, and that professional competence could provide protection against the economic uncertainties that had affected previous generations of her family. Her parents' emphasis on academic excellence and their support for her educational goals had enabled Rebecca to earn a bachelor's degree in healthcare administration from the University of Montana in 2011, graduating with honors and job offers from medical facilities throughout the region. The healthcare administration program at the University of Montana had provided Rebecca with comprehensive training in medical billing systems, insurance coordination, regulatory compliance, and healthcare economics that had prepared her for leadership roles in medical facilities ranging from small rural clinics to large hospital systems. Her academic success and internship experiences had demonstrated her ability to master complex systems and to work effectively with medical professionals, insurance companies, and patients in environments where accuracy and attention to detail were essential for both financial success and patient care. Rebecca's decision to accept the position at Riverside Family Clinic, rather than pursuing opportunities at larger medical facilities, had been motivated by her desire to serve rural communities where healthcare access was limited and where her skills could make a meaningful difference in the lives of families who depended on local medical facilities for essential services. The clinic position had also offered the work-life balance that she had wanted, while raising Marcus as a single mother after her divorce from David. Her 5 years at Riverside Family Clinic had been professionally fulfilling and financially successful, allowing Rebecca to develop expertise in rural healthcare operations while building savings and providing Marcus with stability and opportunities that had prepared him for academic success and personal growth. The clinic had served patients from throughout a 150-mile radius, providing primary care, emergency services, and coordination with specialists for families who would otherwise have been forced to travel hundreds of miles for medical attention. Rebecca's role as senior medical billing coordinator had involved managing insurance claims, coordinating payments with government programs, and ensuring compliance with regulations that affected rural healthcare facilities differently than urban medical centers. Her work had required detailed knowledge of Medicare and Medicaid systems, private insurance networks, and the complex billing procedures that determined whether rural clinics could maintain financial viability while serving populations with limited ability to pay for medical services. The relationships that Rebecca had developed with patients and their families during her years at the clinic had provided her with deep understanding of the challenges facing rural Montana communities, where economic opportunities were limited and where access to healthcare, education, and social services required resourcefulness and mutual support among neighbors who understood the importance of helping each other during difficult times. Marcus had been born in 2012 during Rebecca's second year at the clinic and had grown up surrounded by the caring community that had formed around the medical facility where his mother worked. The boy's early childhood had been shaped by relationships with clinic staff members who had watched him grow up, patients who had known him since infancy, and community members who had provided the extended family support that was characteristic of rural Montana communities where everyone's children were considered part of the broader social fabric. The diagnosis of Marcus's kidney condition when he was 4 years old had been devastating news that had tested Rebecca's emotional strength and financial resources. But the support she had received from her colleagues at the clinic and the community they served had provided both practical assistance and emotional encouragement during the months of medical testing, specialist consultations, and treatment, planning that had been necessary to establish his ongoing care requirements. Marcus's medical needs had required Rebecca to develop expertise in pediatric nephrology, insurance coordination for specialty care, and the complex logistics of managing a child's chronic medical condition while maintaining full-time employment and single-parenthood responsibilities. Her experience navigating the healthcare system as both a professional and a parent had provided her with insights into the challenges facing families dealing with medical crises and had reinforced her commitment to ensuring that rural communities had access to quality healthcare services. The boy's intelligence and curiosity had been evident from early childhood, but his medical condition and the time spent in medical facilities had also contributed to his interest in science, technology, and history as ways of understanding the world beyond his immediate circumstances. Marcus had learned to ask thoughtful questions about his medical treatments and had developed maturity and resilience that impressed healthcare providers who worked with pediatric patients dealing with chronic conditions. Rebecca's divorce from David in 2021 had been a necessary decision that had prioritized Marcus's stability and well-being over maintaining a marriage that had become characterized by financial irresponsibility and emotional unreliability that was creating stress and uncertainty that affected their family's security and Marcus's development. David's gambling addiction and his inability to maintain steady employment had made it impossible to build the kind of stable household that Marcus needed during his elementary school years. The divorce settlement had been structured to minimize financial disruption while ensuring that Marcus would continue to have relationship with his father despite David's personal problems and his inconsistent approach to parental responsibilities. Rebecca had retained primary custody and decision-making authority regarding Marcus's medical care and education, while David had been assigned child support obligations that reflected his earning potential when he was employed consistently. David's construction work in Wyoming oil fields had provided periods of high income that had enabled him to make substantial child support payments. But the boom and bust nature of energy industry employment and his gambling problems had made his financial contributions unpredictable and unreliable for budgeting purposes. Rebecca had learned to manage their household budget based solely on her clinic income, while treating any child support payments as unexpected assistance rather than essential income. The community support that Rebecca and Marcus had received during the divorce period had demonstrated the value of living in a place where neighbors understood each other's challenges and where local institutions like the clinic, the school, and community organizations provided networks of mutual assistance that helped families navigate difficult transitions while maintaining stability for children who needed continuity during periods of family change. Marcus's academic performance had remained excellent throughout his parents' divorce and his ongoing medical treatments, reflecting both his intellectual abilities and the stability that Rebecca had worked to maintain despite the challenges of single parenthood and the financial pressures that had characterized their household during the transition period following her marriage's end. The savings that Rebecca had accumulated during her years of stable employment at the clinic had provided financial security that had enabled her to purchase their apartment furnishings, establish Marcus's college savings account, and build the emergency fund that had ultimately been consumed by his appendectomy and the income loss that had followed the clinic's closure. Rebecca's financial planning had been conservative and responsible, reflecting the values that her mother and grandmother had demonstrated through their approaches to money management and their understanding that economic security required careful budgeting, emergency savings, and the ability to live below one's means in order to prepare for unexpected challenges that could affect family stability and security. The professional relationships that Rebecca had developed during her healthcare administration career had provided her with references and recommendations that had been valuable during her job search. But the regional nature of the healthcare industry and the limited number of available positions had made it difficult to leverage her experience and qualifications into new employment opportunities within a time frame that could address her immediate financial needs. Her reputation for competence and reliability within Montana's healthcare community had generated sympathy and support from former colleagues who understood her qualifications and her circumstances. But their ability to provide practical assistance was limited by the economic pressures affecting healthcare facilities throughout the region and the competitive job market that was affecting all displaced healthcare workers. The legacy of resilience and determination that had characterized 3 generations of Hartwell women was now being tested by circumstances that exceeded anything that Dorothy or Janet had faced during their own periods of economic challenge and family responsibility. Rebecca's current crisis represented not just immediate threats to housing and financial security, but also the potential end of the stability and opportunities that previous generations had worked to build for their children and grandchildren. But the family values and personal characteristics that had enabled Dorothy to overcome Great Depression hardships, and Janet to build professional success as a single mother, were also shaping Rebecca's approach to their current crisis, providing her with the determination and resourcefulness that would soon lead her to make decisions that seemed financially reckless, but would ultimately validate the family legacy of courage and perseverance that had sustained 3 generations of strong women who had refused to accept defeat when circumstances seemed impossible to overcome. Rebecca's systematic approach to solving their housing crisis had begun with exhaustive research into every available assistance program, employment, opportunity, and alternative housing option that might provide solutions within their impossible time frame and financial constraints. Her healthcare administration background had taught her to navigate complex bureaucratic systems and to identify resources that might not be immediately obvious to people without professional experience in coordinating benefits and services for families facing medical and financial emergencies. The Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services had provided Rebecca with detailed information about emergency assistance programs. But the application processes required documentation and waiting periods that extended far beyond their February 15th eviction deadline. The Temporary Assistance for Needy Families program could provide monthly cash assistance of $489 for a family of 2, but the application process required 6 weeks for initial approval and included asset limitations that would require Rebecca to spend down her remaining savings and sell her car before becoming eligible for benefits. The Low-Income Energy Assistance Program had provided Rebecca with $340 toward their heating bill in January, helping to prevent utility shutoff, but doing nothing to address their rent arrears or housing crisis. The program's annual benefit limits meant that no additional assistance would be available until the following winter, while the household income requirements would make them ineligible for continued participation if Rebecca secured employment that paid enough to cover their basic living expenses. Rebecca had applied for emergency rental assistance through the Montana Board of Housing, but their emergency rental assistance program had a waiting list of 847 applicants with an estimated processing time of 16 to 24 weeks for families that weren't facing immediate eviction. The program's funding had been overwhelmed by demand from families throughout Montana who were experiencing housing insecurity due to unemployment, medical expenses, and the economic disruptions that had affected rural communities throughout the state. The Salvation Army's Emergency Assistance Program had provided Rebecca with grocery vouchers worth $200 and had placed her on their waiting list for emergency rent assistance. But their available funds for housing assistance were limited to $500 per family per year, an amount that would have minimal impact on their $4,800 rent debt. The organization's caseworker had been sympathetic and helpful, but had explained that demand for emergency assistance had increased dramatically while funding had remained static, creating impossible choices about which families could receive help. Catholic Charities had provided Marcus with school supplies and winter clothing through their Children's Assistance Program, but their emergency financial assistance was limited to utility bills and had annual limits that prevented them from addressing rent obligations or housing deposits. The organization's volunteer coordinator had spent considerable time helping Rebecca research additional resources and had provided emotional support during their most difficult weeks, but practical assistance options were limited by funding, constraints, and program restrictions. Rebecca's attempts to negotiate with Mountain View Apartments management had initially seemed promising when the property manager had agreed to accept partial rent payments during her first 3 months of unemployment. The management company's regional policy manual included provisions for temporary payment plans during tenant hardship periods, but those accommodations were limited to 90 days and required demonstration of employment or other income sources that could restore full payment capabilities within the accommodation period. The apartment complex's corporate ownership structure meant that local management had limited authority to make exceptions to regional policies, especially for payment plans that extended beyond their standard accommodation periods. The property manager had expressed personal sympathy for Rebecca's situation and had delayed filing eviction paperwork for 2 additional weeks beyond their normal timeline, but company policy required proceeding with eviction proceedings once tenants had exceeded 120 days of partial or missed payments. Rebecca's meeting with a tenants' rights attorney through the Montana Legal Aid Association had provided her with detailed information about eviction procedures and her legal rights, but had also confirmed that their rent arrears and the apartment complex's compliance with state notification requirements meant that the eviction would proceed unless she could produce the full amount owed plus associated legal fees by the February 15th deadline. The legal aid attorney had explained that Montana's eviction laws provided limited protections for tenants facing financial hardship due to job loss or medical expenses, especially when landlords had made reasonable accommodations, and tenants had been unable to restore payment capabilities within extended timeframes. The attorney had helped Rebecca understand her options for negotiating additional time or payment arrangements, but had been clear that her legal position was weak given the duration of their payment problems. Rebecca's employment search had expanded beyond healthcare administration to include any position that could provide sufficient income to address their immediate housing needs while maintaining Marcus's medical care and educational stability. She had applied for administrative positions at banks, insurance companies, and government agencies throughout Montana, recognizing that her transferable skills in documentation, compliance, and customer service could be valuable in various professional environments. The Montana Department of Transportation had interviewed Rebecca for a position coordinating medical certifications for commercial drivers, a role that would have utilized her healthcare administration experience while providing stable government employment with comprehensive benefits. The interview had gone well, and the hiring manager had indicated that Rebecca was a strong candidate, but the position's starting date was March 15th, and the background check and security clearance processes would require 6 to 8 weeks, extending beyond their eviction deadline. A medical billing company in Bozeman had offered Rebecca a remote work position that would have allowed her to maintain their current residence while earning $2,800 monthly plus benefits. The position would have been ideal for their circumstances, but the company's policy required new employees to complete 6 weeks of training at their Bozeman facility before transitioning to remote work, creating logistical challenges that would require temporary housing arrangements during the training period. Rebecca had calculated that the costs of temporary housing in Bozeman during training, combined with maintaining their Billings apartment to preserve Marcus's school enrollment and medical care continuity, would exceed their available financial resources, even if she could negotiate delayed start payments with the apartment complex. The timing and logistics of the remote position had made it impractical, despite its long-term potential for solving their financial problems. 3 hospitals in Great Falls had interviewed Rebecca for positions ranging from medical billing coordinator to patient services supervisor, opportunities that would have provided adequate income and benefits for rebuilding their financial stability. But the competitive nature of the regional healthcare job market had resulted in positions being offered to candidates with more specialized experience or existing relationships within the hiring organizations, leaving Rebecca with positive feedback, but no job offers. The interview experiences had been professionally valuable and had provided Rebecca with insights into current trends in healthcare administration and the skills that employers were prioritizing in the evolving medical industry. Several hiring managers had encouraged her to reapply for future openings and had indicated that her qualifications and experience were excellent, but immediate opportunities were limited by budget constraints and the surplus of qualified candidates. In the regional market, Rebecca's exploration of employment opportunities outside the healthcare industry had included applications for supervisory positions in retail management, customer service coordination, and administrative support roles that offered adequate compensation but required experience in industries where she had limited background. Her healthcare administration skills were transferable, but employers in other industries often preferred candidates with direct experience in their specific operational environments. A bank in Billings had interviewed Rebecca for a position as a loan processing coordinator, recognizing that her experience with insurance coordination and regulatory compliance provided relevant skills for financial services operations. The position would have paid $2,600 monthly plus benefits, sufficient to address their housing needs if she could secure it quickly enough to prevent eviction, but the bank's hiring process required credit checks and employment verification procedures that extended their decision timeline beyond Rebecca's immediate needs. The bank's human resources manager had been understanding about Rebecca's timeline constraints and had expedited their review process as much as possible, but institutional. Policies regarding background checks and reference verification could not be compressed below 2 weeks, making it impossible for Rebecca to receive a job offer before their eviction deadline, even if she was selected for the position. Rebecca's consideration of moving to other states where healthcare administration opportunities might be more abundant had been complicated by the specialized nature of Marcus's medical care and the importance of maintaining continuity with his nephrology team at Billings Children's Hospital. The boy's kidney condition required quarterly monitoring and immediate access to emergency care that would be disrupted by relocation to unfamiliar medical systems in other states. The pediatric nephrology specialists who managed Marcus's ongoing treatment had developed comprehensive understanding of his specific condition and treatment history that would be difficult to replicate with new medical providers, who would need time to review his records and establish new care relationships. The risks of interrupting his medical care during a transition period had made relocation options impractical, regardless of employment opportunities that might be available in other regions. Rebecca's research into alternative housing options had revealed a market where available rental properties were either too expensive for her unemployment benefits or located in areas that would compromise Marcus's access to his medical care and educational opportunities. The few apartments within her budget range were in neighborhoods with higher crime rates and schools with lower academic performance ratings that would negatively impact Marcus's development and future opportunities. temporary housing options, including weekly motels and extended stay facilities, would cost more per month than their current apartment, while providing inferior living conditions and no stability for Marcus's school attendance and homework routines. The temporary nature of such arrangements would also make it difficult for Rebecca to establish the stability necessary for job interviews and employment, while managing Marcus's ongoing medical appointments and educational needs. Rebecca's consideration of moving in with friends or family members had been limited by the geographic isolation of their support network and the financial pressures affecting people throughout their community. Her closest friends were dealing with their own economic challenges in a regional economy that had been affected by healthcare facility closures, energy industry volatility, and the broader economic uncertainties that were making it difficult for rural communities to maintain stability and growth. The mathematical impossibility of their situation had become clear through Rebecca's systematic analysis of every available option and resource. Even if she could secure employment immediately, the timing required for first paychecks would extend beyond their eviction deadline. Even if she could access emergency assistance programs, the amounts available were insufficient to address their rent debt. Even if she could negotiate additional time with their landlord, her unemployment benefits were inadequate for maintaining ongoing rent payments while she searched for employment. The convergence of timing, financial constraints, and limited options had created a crisis that exceeded what conventional approaches could address within the time frames and resources available to a single mother managing unemployment and her child's medical needs. Rebecca's professional problem-solving skills and systematic approach to research had revealed the full extent of their impossible situation rather than identifying viable solutions that could prevent homelessness and the disruption of Marcus's medical care and education. But Rebecca's exhaustive exploration of conventional solutions had also led her to discover unconventional options that she might never have considered under less desperate circumstances. Her daily review of classified advertisements and legal notices had introduced her to foreclosure auctions, tax sales, and other opportunities that typically attracted real estate investors, but might also provide alternatives for families seeking affordable housing through non-traditional approaches that required creativity and calculated risk-taking rather than conventional financing and rental arrangements. Marcus Hartwell's fascination with military history and aviation had begun during his recovery from kidney surgery when he was 8 years old, when long hours of bed rest and medical appointments had provided time for reading and research that had developed into a passionate hobby encompassing everything from World War II fighter aircraft specifications to detailed knowledge of famous military campaigns and the strategic decisions that had shaped major historical conflicts throughout American and world history. The boy's medical condition had necessitated frequent trips to Billings Children's Hospital for monitoring and treatments, and during waiting periods in medical offices and recovery time. At home, Marcus had discovered the public library's extensive collection of military history books, aviation magazines, and historical documentaries that had captured his imagination and provided intellectual stimulation during periods when physical activities were limited by his health requirements and treatment schedules. Marcus's systematic approach to learning about military history reflected the same analytical thinking that made him an exceptional student in mathematics and science. But his research interests had evolved beyond casual reading into serious study that impressed adults with its depth and accuracy. The 12-year-old had memorized technical specifications for dozens of World War II aircraft, could explain the strategic significance of major battles, and had developed understanding of military tactics and logistics that demonstrated genuine scholarly engagement with complex historical subjects. His bedroom had been transformed into a personal museum containing model airplanes that he had assembled with meticulous attention to historical accuracy, maps showing major battle locations that he had marked with pins and annotations, and notebooks filled with his own research about military leaders, technological developments, and the social and economic factors that had influenced major conflicts. The collection represented years of dedicated study and reflected Marcus's ability to maintain focus and pursue interests, despite the medical appointments and treatments that structured much of his weekly schedule. Rebecca had initially encouraged Marcus's interest in military history as a healthy outlet that provided intellectual challenge and educational value. But she had been surprised by the sophistication of his research and his ability to understand complex, strategic concepts that many adults would find difficult to comprehend. The boy's teachers had consistently praised his knowledge and his ability to contribute insights during social studies discussions that demonstrated reading and research far beyond typical sixth-grade curriculum requirements. Marcus's particular interest in the American West and frontier military history had led him to extensive reading about cavalry operations, Native American conflicts, and the role of military posts in establishing settlements throughout Montana and surrounding territories. During the late 19th century, his research had provided him with detailed knowledge about military figures, trading posts, and the complex relationships between military personnel and civilian settlers who had shaped the development of communities throughout the region. The boy's fascination with frontier military history had also introduced him to stories about outlaws, lawmen, and the violent conflicts that had characterized life in Montana Territory during the 1870s and 1880s, when mining booms and cattle ranching had created opportunities for both legitimate enterprise and criminal activity. Marcus had read extensively about famous outlaws, including Butch Cassidy, the Sundance Kid, and lesser-known figures whose exploits had contributed to the mythology and actual history of the American West. His research had included detailed study of how outlaws had operated their criminal enterprises, the methods they had used to hide stolen goods and money, and the geographic knowledge that had enabled successful bandits to evade law enforcement by utilizing remote locations and difficult terrain that provided natural protection from pursuit. Marcus had been particularly interested in stories about hidden treasures and the logistical challenges that outlaws had faced when attempting to conceal large amounts of gold and silver in environments where permanent hiding places required careful planning and geographic knowledge. Marcus's military history research had also provided him with understanding of the construction techniques and defensive considerations that had influenced building design during the frontier period, including the ways that homesteaders and business operators had incorporated security features into their structures to protect against both criminal activity and the harsh environmental conditions that characterized life in Montana Territory. During the late 1800s, the boy's analytical approach to studying military history had taught him to look for patterns, strategic thinking, and the practical considerations that had influenced historical events and individual decisions during periods of conflict and uncertainty. His research had developed his ability to understand maps, terrain features, and the geographic factors that had affected military operations and civilian settlements throughout the American West during the frontier period. Rebecca had been impressed by Marcus's dedication to his historical research and had supported his interest by helping him access library resources, historical societies, and online databases that had expanded his knowledge beyond what was available through school curricula and casual reading. The boy's hobby had provided structure and intellectual stimulation during periods when his medical condition had limited other activities, while also developing research skills and historical knowledge that were contributing to his academic success. Marcus's teachers had suggested that his military history knowledge and research skills could lead to future educational opportunities in history, political science, or military studies, if he maintained his interest and continued developing his analytical abilities. Several educators had noted that his understanding of strategic thinking and historical analysis was exceptional for his age and could provide foundation for advanced study in fields that required similar research and analytical capabilities. The boy's interest in frontier history had also led him to research about Montana's mining boom periods and the communities that had developed around gold and silver discoveries throughout the territory during the late 19th century. His reading had provided him with knowledge about mining techniques, the economic factors that had driven mineral exploration, and the social dynamics that had characterized boom towns where fortunes were made and lost based on mineral discoveries and mining operations. Marcus had developed particular fascination with stories about lost mines and hidden treasures that were part of Montana's folklore and historical record. His research had revealed that many mining claims had been abandoned due to Indian conflicts, harsh weather, or the inability of individual prospectors to extract minerals from difficult terrain using primitive equipment available during the frontier period. The boy had read extensively about prospectors and miners who had supposedly hidden their discoveries or accumulated wealth in remote locations where they could retrieve it later under safer circumstances. His systematic approach to studying these historical accounts had taught Marcus to distinguish between folklore and documented historical facts, while also understanding that many frontier-era stories contained elements of truth that had been embellished or distorted through decades of retelling. The boy had learned to evaluate historical sources and to identify the kinds of evidence that historians used to verify or dispute claims about past events and the people who had participated in them. Marcus's research into outlaw history had provided him with detailed knowledge about Blackjack Morrison, a lesser-known but historically documented figure who had operated throughout Montana and Wyoming territories during the 1880s. Unlike more famous outlaws whose exploits had been romanticized in popular culture, Morrison had been a methodical criminal who had planned his operations carefully and had avoided the kind of spectacular violence that had made other outlaws famous, but had also led to their capture or death. The boy's research had revealed that Morrison had been unusual among frontier outlaws because of his education and his systematic approach to criminal enterprise. Historical records indicated that Morrison had been a former cavalry officer who had used his military training and geographic knowledge to plan robberies and other criminal activities that had generated substantial profits, while minimizing the risks that had destroyed other outlaw gangs during the same period. Marcus had been particularly interested in accounts suggesting that Morrison had accumulated significant wealth through careful planning and selective targeting of mining operations, banks, and wealthy travelers, but that his criminal career had ended abruptly in 1883 when he had apparently disappeared from the region without explanation. The historical mystery of Morrison's fate had captured Marcus's imagination and had led him to extensive research into contemporary newspaper accounts, law enforcement records, and other documentation that might provide clues about what had happened to the outlaw and the wealth he had supposedly accumulated. The boy's research had revealed that Morrison had been suspected of hiding stolen money and silver in remote locations throughout Montana Territory, but that law enforcement had never recovered significant amounts of stolen property despite extensive searches of areas where the outlaw was known to have operated. Contemporary accounts had suggested that Morrison had used his military knowledge to select hiding places that would be difficult for law enforcement to locate, and that would remain secure for extended periods even if he was unable to return to them immediately. Marcus had found references in historical documents suggesting that Morrison had purchased property under assumed names and had established legitimate business relationships that could have provided cover for his criminal activities, while also offering potential locations for concealing stolen goods. The boy's analytical approach to studying these historical accounts had led him to create detailed timelines and maps showing Morrison's known movements and the locations where his criminal activities had been documented. Rebecca had been aware of Marcus's interest in outlaw history, but had not fully understood the depth of his research or the specific knowledge he had developed about Morrison and other frontier criminals. The boy's enthusiasm for sharing interesting historical facts had provided entertainment during their dinner conversations, but Rebecca's focus on their immediate financial crisis had prevented her from fully appreciating the scholarly nature of Marcus's research or its potential relevance to their current circumstances. Marcus's historical research had also provided him with understanding of frontier-era construction techniques and the ways that buildings from the 1880s had been designed to serve multiple purposes, including residential use, business operations, and secure storage of valuable goods. His reading had taught him about the architectural features and construction methods that homesteaders and business operators had used to create secure hiding places within their buildings for money, important documents, and other valuable items that needed protection from theft or environmental damage. The boy's military history background had given him appreciation for the strategic thinking that frontier residents had applied to problems of security and concealment, recognizing that successful hiding places required careful planning and understanding of human psychology as well as practical considerations about accessibility and environmental protection. His research had provided him with knowledge about the kinds of locations and construction features that experienced individuals had used for concealing valuable items during periods when formal banking and security services were unavailable or unreliable. But Marcus had no idea that his extensive research into frontier outlaw history and his detailed knowledge about Blackjack Morrison's criminal career and disappearance would soon become directly relevant to his family's desperate housing crisis. When his mother's decision to attend a county foreclosure auction would bring them into possession of property that had once been owned by the very outlaw whose story had captured the boy's imagination and whose hidden legacy would transform their impossible financial situation into opportunities for adventure and wealth that would exceed anything either of them had imagined possible during their months of struggle with unemployment and impending homelessness. On the morning of February 10th, with just 5 days remaining before their eviction deadline, Rebecca made a decision that would have seemed reckless under any other circumstances, but now represented the only remaining option that could potentially provide immediate housing while preserving her ability to continue job searching and maintaining Marcus's medical care in the Billings area. She had spent the previous evening calculating that her available credit limits and the small amount remaining in their savings account could potentially finance the purchase of a foreclosed property if she could find something within an extremely limited budget range. The Yellowstone County foreclosure auction scheduled for February 12th included 17 properties that had been seized for unpaid taxes, with starting bids ranging from $15,000 for vacant land to $85,000 for residential properties in better condition. Rebecca's financial analysis had revealed that she could potentially access up to $52,000 through a combination of credit card cash advances, personal loans, and the $3,400 remaining in their savings account. But such a strategy would create debt obligations that could destroy their financial future if the property purchase didn't somehow generate income or dramatically reduce their living expenses. The auction listing that had captured Rebecca's attention was a 160-acre homestead property built in 1882, located approximately 45 miles northeast of Billings, in an area that was rural enough to offer privacy and affordability, but close enough to maintain access to Marcus's medical care and educational opportunities. The property description indicated that the homestead included a 2-story stone house, several outbuildings, and a well that had provided water for previous owners, though the current condition of all structures was listed as unknown and prospective. Buyers were advised that the property was being sold as is, without warranties or guarantees. The starting bid for the homestead was $38,000, an amount that was within Rebecca's theoretical financial reach, but represented an enormous gamble for a single mother whose employment prospects remained uncertain and whose current income was insufficient to service additional debt obligations. The property had been abandoned for over 3 years, following the death of its previous owner, an elderly man named Harold Peterson, who had lived alone on the homestead for decades before succumbing to health problems that had prevented him from maintaining the property or paying the taxes that had ultimately led to county seizure. Rebecca's research into the property's history had revealed that Peterson had been a reclusive individual who had purchased the homestead in 1987 and had lived there as a self-sufficient hermit who had maintained minimal contact with neighbors and had rarely visited Billings except for essential business and medical appointments. County records indicated that Peterson had been current on his property taxes until 2019, when declining health and possible dementia had led to financial mismanagement and the accumulation of tax debts that had ultimately resulted in foreclosure proceedings. The property's remote location and unknown condition had limited interest from typical real estate investors who preferred properties closer to urban areas with established utility services and modern amenities that could be easily renovated and resold for profit. The auction listing had attracted minimal attention from the real estate community, suggesting that Rebecca might be able to acquire the property at or near the minimum bid if she was willing to accept the risks associated with purchasing an abandoned homestead with uncertain structural integrity and utility systems. Rebecca's visit to the county assessor's office had provided additional information about the property's characteristics and its history of ownership dating back to its original homestead filing in 1882. The records indicated that the stone house had been built by the original homesteader using local materials and construction techniques that had created a structure designed to withstand harsh Montana weather conditions while providing secure and comfortable living space for frontier families. The property's well had been drilled in 1883 and had provided reliable water for over 140 years, though its current condition and water quality were unknown after 3 years of abandonment. The homestead's location in a valley surrounded by hills had provided natural protection from wind and weather, while offering privacy and security that had appealed to successive owners who had valued independence and self-sufficiency over proximity to urban conveniences and services. Rebecca's consultation with Marcus about the possibility of purchasing the foreclosed homestead had revealed the boys' excitement about the prospect of living in a historic frontier property where they could explore the landscape and investigate the building's history while creating a new home that would provide both adventure and security. Marcus's knowledge of frontier history had made him enthusiastic about the opportunity to live in an authentic 1880s homestead, and his optimism about their ability to make necessary repairs and improvements had provided emotional support for Rebecca's consideration of what remained a financially risky decision. The boy's practical skills and his willingness to help with maintenance and improvement projects had been important factors in Rebecca's evaluation of whether they could successfully manage the challenges of homestead living while she continued searching for employment and maintaining his medical care schedule. Marcus's maturity and adaptability had been demonstrated throughout their months of financial crisis, and his enthusiasm for the homestead opportunity had helped convince Rebecca that the unconventional housing solution might be viable despite its obvious risks and uncertainties. Rebecca's decision to attend the foreclosure auction required her to acknowledge that conventional approaches to solving their housing crisis had been exhausted, and that their circumstances now demanded creative solutions that carried significant risks but also offered potential benefits that traditional rental housing could not provide. The prospect of owning property, even an abandoned homestead with unknown problems, would eliminate monthly rent payments while providing stability and security that rental housing could never offer to a family facing ongoing financial uncertainty. The morning of February 12th arrived with temperatures dropping to -15 degrees Fahrenheit and snow conditions that made travel dangerous throughout rural Montana, factors that Rebecca hoped would further reduce attendance at the foreclosure auction and improve her chances of acquiring the homestead property without competitive bidding that could drive the price beyond her financial capabilities. She had arranged for Marcus to stay with a neighbor family during the auction, recognizing that the proceedings could extend for several hours, and that the courthouse environment would be unsuitable for a 12-year-old who was already anxious about their housing situation. Rebecca's preparation for the auction had included reviewing Montana foreclosure law, understanding bidding procedures, and calculating exactly how much money she could access through various credit sources if she was successful in acquiring the property. Her analysis had revealed that purchasing the homestead would consume nearly all of their available financial resources and would create monthly debt service obligations that would require immediate employment to avoid financial disaster. But the elimination of rent payments would reduce their monthly expenses by $1,600 and would provide housing security that could survive future periods of unemployment or reduced income. The Yellowstone County Courthouse auction room contained fewer than 20 people when proceedings began at 10 a.m., confirming Rebecca's hope that winter weather and the rural nature of most properties would limit competition from serious bidders. The auctioneer's presentation of each property included basic information about location, size, and starting bids, but provided no details about structural condition or potential problems that successful bidders would inherit along with ownership. Responsibilities. When the 160-acre homestead property was announced as lot number 12, Rebecca felt her heart rate increase as she realized that the moment of decision was approaching and that within minutes she would either commit her family to a dramatic change in their living situation or return home to face eviction and homelessness. The auctioneer's description of the property as a 160-acre homestead with stone house and outbuildings, starting bid $38,000, provided no indication of the historical significance or potential discoveries that awaited whoever was willing to take responsibility for the abandoned frontier property. Rebecca raised her hand to acknowledge the starting bid, recognizing that she was committing to a course of action that would either solve their immediate housing crisis or create additional problems that could worsen their already desperate situation. Two other bidders showed initial interest in the property, but their subsequent bids suggested that they were testing the market rather than seriously pursuing acquisition of a remote homestead that would require substantial investment in repairs and improvements before it could generate rental income or resale profit. The bidding process extended through several rounds as Rebecca competed with a real estate investor who appeared to be evaluating the property's potential for development or resale. But the rural location and unknown condition of the structures gradually reduced his interest, and he withdrew from bidding when the price reached $44,000. Rebecca's final bid of $45,500 was accepted by the auctioneer, making her the new owner of 160 acres of Montana prairie and a stone house that had been home to frontier families for over 140 years. The completion of purchase paperwork required Rebecca to provide certified funds for the full purchase amount, plus auction fees totaling $47,200, nearly exhausting her available financial resources but securing immediate ownership of property that would provide her family with housing independence and the opportunity to create stability without monthly rent obligations. The county clerk's office processed the deed transfer and provided Rebecca with keys to the property and contact information for utility companies that could restore electrical and telephone service if the existing systems were still functional. Rebecca's drive to the homestead property that afternoon required 45 minutes of careful navigation through rural roads that had received minimal snow removal. But the journey provided time for contemplation about the dramatic change in their circumstances and the challenges that awaited them in transforming an abandoned frontier property into a comfortable home where Marcus could continue his education and medical care while she rebuilt their financial security through new employment The first view of their new home revealed a substantial stone structure that had been built to last centuries rather than decades, with walls constructed from local sandstone and a design that reflected both practical frontier construction techniques and the aesthetic sensibilities of homesteaders who had intended to create permanent settlements rather than temporary shelters. The house sat in a protected valley location that provided natural windbreaks, while offering views of surrounding hills that created a sense of privacy and security. The property's outbuildings included a large barn that appeared to be in reasonable structural condition, a smaller building that might have served as a workshop or storage facility, and the remains of other structures that had deteriorated beyond usefulness but provided evidence of the homestead's former prosperity and the multiple generations of families who had worked to create a successful agricultural operation in the challenging environment of frontier Montana. Rebecca's initial exploration of the house revealed that Harold Peterson had maintained the basic structural integrity of the building while making minimal modifications to the original 1880s construction, preserving historical features that provided authentic connection to the frontier period while ensuring that the structure remained habitable through over a century of Montana weather extremes. The thick stone walls and solid construction had protected the interior from weather damage during 3 years of abandonment, though accumulated dust and debris would require extensive cleaning before the house could be safely occupied. The well, that had provided water for the homestead since 1883, appeared to be functional, though Rebecca would need to arrange for water quality testing and possible system maintenance before relying on it for drinking and household use. The electrical system installed by previous owners would require professional inspection and possible upgrading to ensure safety and reliability, but the basic infrastructure for modern living existed within the framework of authentic frontier architecture. As Rebecca stood in the main room of their new home, surrounded by evidence of over 140 years of Montana history and facing the enormous challenges of transforming an abandoned homestead into a suitable residence for herself and Marcus, she experienced a mixture of excitement and apprehension about the decision that had committed them to a completely different lifestyle and approach to solving their housing and financial problems. But Rebecca had no idea that her desperate gamble on purchasing the foreclosed homestead had brought them into possession of property that contained historical secrets and hidden treasures that would soon transform their risky investment into the discovery of a lifetime, validating her unconventional approach to their housing crisis, while providing opportunities for adventure and wealth that would exceed anything she had imagined possible when she had raised her hand to bid on an abandoned frontier property that seemed like their last hope for avoiding homelessness and maintaining their family's stability in rural Montana. The first 3 weeks of February were consumed by the enormous task of making the 1882 homestead habitable for Rebecca and Marcus, a process that revealed both the remarkable craftsmanship of frontier construction and the accumulated challenges of 3 years of abandonment that had allowed weather, wildlife, and neglect to create problems throughout the property that required immediate attention before they could safely occupy their new home. Rebecca's initial priority had been restoring basic utilities to ensure that they would have electricity, water, and heating before moving Marcus from their temporary arrangement with neighbors back to their own residence where he could maintain his normal school schedule and medical appointment routine. The electrical system installed during the 1960s required extensive repairs and partial replacement to meet current safety codes, a project that consumed $3,800 of their remaining funds, but provided reliable power throughout the house and outbuildings. The water system evaluation had revealed that Harold Peterson's well remained productive, and that the water quality exceeded Montana state standards for residential use, eliminating concerns about one of the most critical infrastructure requirements for homestead living. The original hand-dug well from 1883 had been supplemented in 1923 with a deeper drilled well that tapped into an aquifer providing abundant clean water that had sustained the property through multiple drought periods and had never failed during previous ownership transitions. The heating system required complete replacement of the propane furnace that had been installed in the 1980s, but had failed during the final years of Peterson's residence, forcing Rebecca to invest $200 in a new high-efficiency unit that would provide reliable heating while minimizing ongoing fuel costs that were essential for managing their tight budget during her continued unemployment and job search activities. Marcus's enthusiasm for their frontier lifestyle had been invaluable during the restoration process, as the boys' willingness to help with cleaning, minor repairs, and exploration of the property had provided both practical assistance and emotional support during the physically and financially demanding work of making the homestead livable. His knowledge of frontier history had also contributed insights about the original construction techniques and the purposes of various architectural features that had helped Rebecca understand the building's design and plan appropriate restoration approaches. The stone walls that formed the house's foundation and first-floor structure had been built using construction techniques that reflected both practical frontier engineering and the availability of excellent building stone from quarries located within 5 miles of the homestead site. The original builders had created walls that were nearly 3 feet thick at the foundation level, providing exceptional insulation and structural stability that had enabled the house to survive over 140 years of Montana weather extremes with minimal maintenance or structural problems. The second story had been constructed using heavy timber framing with local pine lumber, creating living spaces that had been designed to accommodate large frontier families while providing privacy and comfort during long winter periods when outdoor activities were limited by weather conditions. The original floor plan included 4 upstairs bedrooms and a large common area that had served multiple purposes, including food storage, textile production, and indoor workspace during harsh weather periods. Rebecca's exploration of the house had revealed evidence of modifications made by successive owners who had adapted the frontier structure to accommodate changing needs and technologies while preserving the essential character and functionality of the original design. Harold Peterson's occupancy had involved minimal changes to the historical architecture, but he had installed modern plumbing and electrical systems that had provided contemporary conveniences while maintaining the authentic atmosphere of frontier-era construction. The basement level had been carved from bedrock during the original construction, creating storage areas and root cellars that had provided frontier families with secure spaces for preserving food and storing valuable items during periods when external threats or harsh weather made surface-level storage impractical or dangerous. The basement areas retained stable temperatures year-round and showed evidence of sophisticated ventilation systems that had prevented moisture problems while maintaining air quality in underground spaces. Marcus's systematic exploration of the Basement areas had revealed construction details and storage arrangements that reflected the frontier period's emphasis on self-sufficiency and security, including reinforced storage areas that had been designed to protect valuable items from theft or environmental damage. The boy's military history background had helped him understand the defensive considerations that had influenced the basement's design and the strategic thinking that frontier homesteaders had applied to problems of security and resource protection. The property's outbuildings had required extensive evaluation to determine which structures could be restored for contemporary use, and which had deteriorated beyond practical repair, a process that had revealed the scope and sophistication of the original homestead operation that had included livestock management, grain storage, equipment maintenance, and various forms of agricultural production that had supported frontier families through subsistence farming and small-scale commercial activities. The large barn had been constructed using the same high-quality stone and timber techniques that characterized the main house, creating a structure that remained fundamentally sound despite decades of limited maintenance and 3 years of complete abandonment. Rebecca's evaluation had determined that the barn could be restored for vehicle storage and workshop space, with modest investment in roofing repairs and basic structural maintenance that she and Marcus could accomplish using their own labor and minimal professional assistance. A smaller outbuilding that had apparently served as a blacksmith shop during the frontier period contained equipment and tools that had been abandoned by successive owners but remained functional for basic metalworking and repair activities. Marcus's fascination with frontier technology had led him to research the purposes and operation of the various tools and equipment, providing historical context that enhanced their understanding of the original homestead's capabilities and self-sufficiency. The property's water systems included not only the functional wells that provided household water, but also an elaborate system of channels and retention areas that had been designed to capture and store rainwater and snowmelt for agricultural and livestock use during dry periods. The engineering sophistication of these water management features reflected frontier knowledge and planning that had enabled successful agricultural operations in an environment where water availability could vary dramatically between wet and dry years. Rebecca's financial situation had stabilized somewhat through the elimination of monthly rent payments and the reduced living expenses that characterized rural homestead life, but her job search remained urgent because their savings had been exhausted by the property purchase and initial restoration costs. The homestead provided housing security and reduced monthly expenses, but Rebecca still needed employment to service the debt obligations she had incurred during the purchase process and to provide ongoing income for Marcus's medical care and educational needs. The remote location of their homestead created both advantages and challenges for Rebecca's employment search, as the distance from Billings required careful coordination of job interviews with Marcus's school schedule and medical appointments, while also limiting her access to networking opportunities and casual employment options that might have been available in urban environments. The 45-minute commute to Billings was manageable for regular employment, but made spontaneous meetings and short-notice opportunities more difficult to accommodate. Marcus's adaptation to homestead life had been remarkably successful, as the boy's interest in frontier history and his practical skills had prepared him for the challenges and opportunities of rural living, while his medical condition had remained stable under the care plan that Rebecca had maintained despite their Housing transition. The homestead's clean air and water had actually provided health benefits that had reduced some of the respiratory symptoms that had occasionally complicated Marcus's kidney condition during their apartment living in Billings. The boys' school transportation had been arranged through the rural school district's bus system that served homestead and ranch families throughout the region, providing Marcus with reliable access to his educational program while allowing him to maintain friendships and extracurricular activities that were important for his social development and academic success. The longer commute times had actually provided Marcus with additional reading time that he had used to expand his military history research and to begin investigating the specific history of their homestead property. Rebecca's initial research into the homestead's history had been limited to the property records and tax information that had been relevant for the purchase decision. But Marcus's systematic approach to historical investigation had revealed that their property had a more complex and interesting background than she had initially understood. The boys' research had identified previous owners and had begun to trace the homestead's history back to its original establishment during the 1880s, when Montana Territory had been a frontier region where homesteading, mining, and various forms of commercial enterprise had created opportunities for both legitimate settlers and criminal elements. Marcus's discovery that their homestead had been established in 1882 had led him to research the broader historical context of Montana Territory during that period, providing him with understanding of the economic activities, social dynamics, and individual characters who had shaped the development of their region during the frontier era. His research had revealed that the 1880s had been a period of rapid change and considerable violence in Montana, as mining booms, cattle ranching, and railroad construction had created wealth and opportunities, while also attracting outlaws and criminal organizations that had operated throughout the territory. The boys' investigation into local frontier history had identified several notorious individuals who had operated in their area during the 1880s, including Blackjack Morrison, the educated outlaw whose criminal career and mysterious disappearance had been subjects of Marcus's research long before their family had acquired the homestead property. Marcus's growing knowledge of Morrison's activities and his familiarity with the geographic features and historical sites throughout their region had positioned him to recognize connections and patterns that might have been overlooked by researchers. Without his specific interests and analytical approach, Rebecca had been impressed by Marcus's historical research and had encouraged his investigation into their property's background, recognizing that understanding the homestead's history could provide insights into its construction features and might reveal interesting stories that could enhance their appreciation for the frontier legacy they had inherited through their unconventional housing solution. But she had been focused primarily on practical concerns about employment, finances, and the ongoing restoration work that was necessary to make their homestead fully functional for contemporary living. Marcus's systematic exploration of the homestead buildings had included careful examination of construction details, room layouts, and architectural features that reflected frontier-era building techniques and the specific needs of families who had lived self-sufficiently in remote locations, where external assistance was unavailable during emergencies or harsh weather periods. His military history background had taught him to observe defensive considerations and strategic features that had influenced frontier construction, while his analytical thinking had enabled him to understand the practical purposes of various design elements. The boy's exploration had revealed that the homestead's builders had incorporated numerous security features and concealment capabilities that reflected the dangers and uncertainties of frontier life during a period when law enforcement was limited, and property protection required individual initiative and careful planning. These features included reinforced storage areas, concealed compartments, and architectural elements that could serve defensive purposes if the homestead came under attack from hostile individuals or groups. Marcus's growing understanding of frontier security measures and his knowledge of outlaw tactics and hideout strategies had begun to suggest intriguing possibilities about the purposes of certain architectural features and room arrangements that might have served functions beyond normal domestic activities. His research into Blackjack Morrison's activities and his familiarity with the methods that educated criminals had used for concealing stolen goods had provided him with analytical framework for evaluating the homestead's design features and considering whether their property might have connections to historical activities that had never been documented or discovered by previous owners. But neither Rebecca nor Marcus had any idea that the boy's systematic investigation of their homestead's history and his growing understanding of frontier-era security measures were leading toward discoveries that would validate his research. While revealing that their desperate gamble on purchasing an abandoned property had brought them into possession of secrets that had been hidden for over 140 years and would soon transform their financial struggles into opportunities for wealth and adventure that would exceed anything they had imagined possible when they had committed their family's future to restoring a forgotten piece of Montana's frontier legacy. Marcus's breakthrough discovery came on March 8th, during what had begun as routine exploration of the homestead's basement storage areas, when his systematic examination of the stone foundation walls revealed construction irregularities that his knowledge of frontier building techniques suggested might indicate concealed spaces or hidden compartments that had been deliberately incorporated into the original 1882 design for purposes that previous owners had either never discovered or had chosen not to investigate thoroughly. The boy's attention had been drawn to a section of the basement's east wall, where the stonework pattern differed subtly from the surrounding construction, featuring slightly smaller stones arranged in a configuration that created almost imperceptible variations in the wall's surface texture and alignment. Marcus's military history research had taught him to recognize camouflage and concealment techniques, while his study of frontier security measures had provided him with understanding of the methods that 1880s homesteaders had used to create hidden storage areas for protecting valuable items from theft or discovery during periods of danger or uncertainty. Marcus had been working systematically through the basement areas for several weeks, measuring room dimensions, documenting construction features, and creating detailed maps of the underground spaces that would help him understand the homestead's original design and the purposes of various architectural elements. His approach reflected the same analytical methodology that had made his military history research so thorough and accurate, involving careful observation, systematic documentation, and logical analysis of patterns and relationships that might provide insights into historical activities and individual motivations. The irregularity in the east wall's stonework had initially appeared to be a minor construction variation that reflected the practical challenges of frontier building rather than deliberate design intention. But Marcus's growing familiarity with the overall construction quality and consistency had made the deviation more noticeable and potentially significant. The original builders had demonstrated exceptional skill and attention to detail throughout the homestead, making the subtle differences in this wall section inconsistent with their apparent standards and craftsmanship. Marcus's physical examination of the irregular stonework had revealed that several stones could be moved slightly when pressure was applied in specific directions, suggesting that the wall section might have been designed to provide access to concealed space behind the visible construction. The boys' systematic testing of individual stones had identified a sequence of movements that, when performed correctly, caused a section of the wall to shift inward and reveal the opening to a hidden chamber that had remained sealed since its original construction. The concealed chamber measured approximately 8 feet wide by 12 feet deep and 6 feet high, providing substantial storage space that had been excavated from the bedrock during the homestead's original construction and had been accessed through the movable wall section that could be sealed to create the appearance of continuous stone construction. The chamber's design reflected sophisticated planning and engineering that had required considerable additional labor during the building process, but had created a secure space that would be virtually impossible to detect without detailed knowledge of its existence and operation. Marcus's initial exploration of the hidden chamber using a flashlight had revealed that the space contained several wooden crates, metal containers, and cloth-wrapped bundles that appeared to have been stored deliberately rather than abandoned carelessly, suggesting that someone had used the concealed area for protecting valuable items rather than simply storing everyday materials that could have been kept in conventional storage areas throughout the homestead. The chamber's ventilation system included carefully concealed air passages that connected to the homestead's main ventilation network, ensuring that the hidden space would remain dry and well ventilated to prevent moisture damage to stored materials, while maintaining air quality that would preserve both organic and metal items indefinitely. The engineering sophistication of the ventilation system demonstrated that the chamber had been designed for long-term storage of valuable materials rather than temporary concealment during brief emergency periods. Marcus's examination of the stored materials had revealed that the wooden crates contained carefully wrapped items that appeared to be books, documents, and other paper materials that had been protected against moisture and deterioration through wrapping in oiled cloth and storage in sealed containers. The metal containers held various objects wrapped in cloth that felt like tools, weapons, or other metal items, while the cloth bundles contained items of various sizes and weights that could not be identified without careful unwrapping and examination. The boy's decision to inform Rebecca about his discovery had been motivated by both excitement about the historical significance of his find and recognition that the concealed chamber and its contents represented potential value that could be relevant to their family's ongoing financial situation and his mother's efforts to establish stable employment and rebuild their economic security following their desperate transition to homestead living. Rebecca's initial reaction to Marcus's announcement that he had discovered a hidden chamber filled with mysterious storage containers had been skepticism mixed with concern about safety issues related to exploring concealed spaces that might contain hazardous materials or unstable structural conditions. Her practical focus on employment search and homestead restoration had made her cautious about distractions that might divert time and energy from essential activities. But Marcus's systematic approach to the discovery and his detailed documentation of safety precautions had convinced her that the chamber warranted serious investigation. Rebecca's examination of the hidden chamber had confirmed Marcus's observations about its sophisticated construction and the deliberate nature of the stored materials, while also revealing that the concealed space represented a substantial construction. Investment that would have required considerable additional expense during the homestead's original building process. The chamber's existence suggested that the original homesteader had anticipated needing secure storage for valuable items and had been willing to invest significantly in creating concealment capabilities that exceeded normal frontier security measures. The systematic examination of the chamber's contents had required careful planning to ensure that potentially valuable historical materials would not be damaged during the investigation process, while also maintaining documentation that could be important if the items proved to have legal, historical, or financial significance that required professional evaluation or official reporting. Rebecca's healthcare administration background had provided her with experience in maintaining accurate records and following systematic procedures for handling sensitive materials. The first wooden crate that Rebecca and Marcus opened together contained a collection of leather-bound ledgers, maps, and documents that appeared to date from the 1880s, based on their paper quality, ink types, and handwriting styles that reflected 19th-century penmanship and record-keeping practices. The documents were in excellent condition due to their careful wrapping and the controlled environment provided by the chamber's ventilation system, making them readable and potentially valuable as historical artifacts regardless of their specific content or authorship. Marcus's examination of the handwritten documents had revealed that many contained detailed records of financial transactions, geographic descriptions, and personal observations that appeared to have been maintained by someone with education and systematic record-keeping habits during the frontier period. The handwriting was clear and consistent, suggesting that the documents had been created by a single individual rather than collected from multiple sources, while the content indicated knowledge of business practices, legal procedures, and geographic features throughout Montana Territory. One particular leather-bound journal had captured Marcus's immediate attention because its cover bore the initials J.M., and its contents included detailed maps of the local area with annotations describing geographic features, travel routes, and specific locations that corresponded to places that Marcus recognized from his research into Montana Territory's geography and historical development. The journal's author had demonstrated intimate knowledge of the region and had maintained records with the kind of detail and precision that suggested professional or business purposes rather than casual, personal observations. Rebecca's examination of the journal's early entries had revealed that they described legitimate business activities, including cattle trading, supply procurement, and financial transactions with established merchants and business operators throughout Montana Territory. During the early 1880s, The author had maintained careful records of income, expenses, and business relationships that suggested successful commercial enterprise and financial sophistication that would have been unusual among typical frontier homesteaders who usually focused on subsistence farming rather than commercial operations. But as Rebecca and Marcus continued reading through the journal's chronological entries, the nature of the recorded activities had gradually shifted from legitimate business operations to descriptions of activities that were clearly criminal in nature, including detailed planning for robberies, descriptions of stolen goods, and careful documentation of methods used to avoid law enforcement detection during various illegal enterprises throughout Montana Territory. Marcus's growing excitement during the examination process had been based on his recognition that the journal's author was describing criminal activities and geographic knowledge that corresponded closely to historical accounts of blackjack, Morrison's operations that the boy had researched extensively during his study of frontier outlaw history. The dates, locations, and methods described in the journal matched documented information about Morrison's criminal career, while providing previously unknown details about his planning processes and the extent of his criminal enterprise. The journal entries from 1883 had included increasingly detailed descriptions of Morrison's efforts to conceal stolen money and silver in secure locations throughout Montana Territory, with specific references to the homestead property where Rebecca and Marcus now lived, and detailed instructions for accessing hidden storage areas that had been created for protecting accumulated wealth from law enforcement recovery efforts. The journal had revealed that Morrison had purchased the homestead property under an assumed name and had used it as both a residence and a secure base for his criminal operations. Rebecca's realization that they were reading the actual journal of Blackjack Morrison, and that their homestead had been his secret headquarters during his criminal career, had been both thrilling and overwhelming, as the implications of their discovery extended far beyond historical curiosity to include potential legal and financial consequences that could affect their family's future in ways that they were not prepared to evaluate without professional assistance and legal guidance. The journal's most significant entries had described Morrison's systematic accumulation of stolen silver and gold, totaling over $400,000 in 1883 values, representing wealth equivalent to more than $12 million in contemporary purchasing power, and had provided detailed instructions for locating the hidden mine, where he had concealed the majority of his stolen treasure in a location that he described as being accessible from the homestead property, but hidden in a way that would prevent discovery by law enforcement or casual explorers. Marcus's analysis of Morrison's geographic descriptions and his knowledge of the terrain surrounding their homestead had enabled him to identify several possible locations where the outlaw might have concealed his treasure, while Rebecca's practical concerns about the legal and financial implications of their discovery had made her recognize that they needed professional assistance for evaluating the journal's authenticity and determining appropriate procedures for investigating Morrison's treasure claims. The metal containers in the hidden chamber had contained Morrison's personal weapons, including a modified revolver and rifle that bore custom engravings indicating his identity, along with various tools and equipment that had been used for his criminal activities and for creating the secure storage areas where he had hidden both his stolen goods and his detailed records of criminal operations throughout Montana Territory. But the most significant discovery had been Morrison's hand-drawn map showing the exact location of his hidden silver mine, along with detailed instructions for accessing the concealed entrance and descriptions of the engineering work he had performed to create secure storage areas within the natural cave system where he had hidden stolen silver worth over $300,000 in 1883 values, representing treasure that could potentially be worth over $20 million using current precious metal prices. Rebecca and Marcus had realized that their desperate gamble on purchasing an abandoned homestead had brought them into possession of one of the American West's most significant lost treasures. But they had also understood that claiming Morrison's legacy would require careful planning, professional assistance, and legal guidance to ensure that their discovery could be developed legitimately while protecting their family's interests and complying with applicable laws governing treasure hunting and historical artifact recovery in Montana. Marcus's breakthrough discovery came on March 8th, during what had begun as routine exploration of the homestead's basement storage areas, when his systematic examination of the stone foundation walls revealed construction irregularities that his knowledge of frontier building techniques suggested might indicate concealed spaces or hidden compartments that had been deliberately incorporated into the original 1882 design for purposes that previous owners had either never discovered or had chosen not to investigate thoroughly. The boys' attention had been drawn to a section of the basement's east wall, where the stonework pattern differed subtly from the surrounding construction, featuring slightly smaller stones arranged in a configuration that created almost imperceptible variations in the wall's surface texture and alignment. Marcus's military history research had taught him to recognize camouflage and concealment techniques, while his study of frontier security measures had provided him with understanding of the methods that 1880s homesteaders had used to create hidden storage areas for protecting valuable items from theft or discovery during periods of danger or uncertainty. Marcus had been working systematically through the basement areas for several weeks, measuring room dimensions, documenting construction features, and creating detailed maps of the underground spaces that would help him understand the homestead's original design and the purposes of various architectural elements. His approach reflected the same analytical methodology that had made his military history research so thorough and accurate, involving careful observation, systematic documentation, and logical analysis of patterns and relationships that might provide insights into historical activities and individual motivations. The irregularity in the east wall's stonework had initially appeared to be a minor construction variation that reflected the practical challenges of frontier building rather than deliberate design intention. But Marcus's growing familiarity with the overall construction quality and consistency had made the deviation more noticeable and potentially significant. The original builders had demonstrated exceptional skill and attention to detail throughout the homestead, making the subtle differences in this wall section inconsistent with their apparent standards and craftsmanship. Marcus's physical examination of the irregular stonework had revealed that several stones could be moved slightly when pressure was applied in specific directions, suggesting that the wall section might have been designed to provide access to concealed space behind the visible construction. The boys' systematic testing of individual stones had identified a sequence of movements that, when performed correctly, caused a section of the wall to shift inward and reveal the opening to a hidden chamber that had remained sealed since its original construction. The concealed chamber measured approximately 8 feet wide by 12 feet deep and 6 feet high, providing substantial storage space that had been excavated from the bedrock during the homestead's original construction and had been accessed through the movable wall section that could be sealed to create the appearance of continuous stone construction. The chamber's design reflected sophisticated planning and engineering that had required considerable additional labor during the building process, but had created a secure space that would be virtually impossible to detect without detailed knowledge of its existence and operation. Marcus's initial exploration of the hidden chamber using a flashlight had revealed that the space contained several wooden crates, metal containers, and cloth-wrapped bundles that appeared to have been stored deliberately rather than abandoned, carelessly, suggesting that someone had used the concealed area for protecting valuable items rather than simply storing everyday materials that could have been kept in conventional storage areas throughout the homestead. The chamber's ventilation system included carefully concealed air passages that connected to the homestead's main ventilation network, ensuring that the hidden space would remain dry and well ventilated to prevent moisture damage to stored materials, while maintaining air quality that would preserve both organic and metal items indefinitely. The engineering sophistication of the ventilation system demonstrated that the chamber had been designed for long-term storage of valuable materials rather than temporary concealment during brief emergency periods. Marcus's examination of the stored materials had revealed that the wooden crates contained carefully wrapped items that appeared to be books, documents, and other paper materials that had been protected against moisture and deterioration through wrapping in oiled cloth and storage in sealed containers. The metal containers held various objects wrapped in cloth that felt like tools, weapons, or other metal items, while the cloth bundles contained items of various sizes and weights that could not be identified without careful unwrapping and examination. The boy's decision to inform Rebecca about his discovery had been motivated by both excitement about the historical significance of his find and recognition that the concealed chamber and its contents represented potential value that could be relevant to their family's ongoing financial situation and his mother's efforts to establish stable employment and rebuild their economic security following their desperate transition to homestead living. Rebecca's initial reaction to Marcus's announcement that he had discovered a hidden chamber filled with mysterious storage containers had been skepticism mixed with concern about safety issues related to exploring concealed spaces that might contain hazardous materials or unstable structural conditions. Her practical focus on employment search and homestead restoration had made her cautious about distractions that might divert time and energy from essential activities. But Marcus's systematic approach to the discovery and his detailed documentation of safety precautions had convinced her that the chamber warranted serious investigation. Rebecca's examination of the hidden chamber had confirmed Marcus's observations about its sophisticated construction and the deliberate nature of the stored materials, while also revealing that the concealed space represented a substantial construction investment that would have required considerable additional expense during the homestead's original building process. The chamber's existence suggested that the original homesteader had anticipated needing secure storage for valuable items and had been willing to invest significantly in creating concealment capabilities that exceeded normal frontier security measures. The systematic examination of the chamber's contents had required careful planning to ensure that potentially valuable historical materials would not be damaged during the investigation process, while also maintaining documentation that could be important if the items proved to have legal, historical, or financial significance that required professional evaluation or official reporting. Rebecca's healthcare administration background had provided her with experience in maintaining accurate records and following systematic procedures for handling sensitive materials. The first wooden crate that Rebecca and Marcus opened together contained a collection of leather-bound ledgers, maps, and documents that appeared to date from the 1880s based on their paper quality, ink types, and handwriting styles that reflected 19th-century penmanship and record-keeping practices. The documents were in excellent condition due to their careful wrapping and the controlled environment provided by the chamber's ventilation system, making them readable and potentially valuable as historical artifacts regardless of their specific content or authorship. Marcus's examination of the handwritten documents had revealed that many contained detailed records of financial transactions, geographic descriptions, and personal observations that appeared to have been maintained by someone with education and systematic record-keeping habits during the frontier period. The handwriting was clear and consistent, suggesting that the documents had been created by a single individual rather than collected from multiple sources. The silver mine that Morrison had worked continued producing precious metals through modern extraction techniques that Rebecca's team had developed in partnership with Montana mining engineers. The sustainable mining operation generated monthly income that exceeded what Rebecca had earned annually as a medical billing coordinator, while providing employment for 12 local residents and contributing to the economic development of their rural community. Marcus's research had identified over 30 potential treasure sites throughout Montana and surrounding states, each representing opportunities for discoveries that could rival their initial find. The boys' analytical approach to historical investigation had attracted attention from the Smithsonian Institution and the National Geographic Society, both of which had offered him internship opportunities that would begin during his high school years. Their story had inspired legislation in Montana and 6 other western states that streamlined procedures for reporting treasure discoveries while protecting landowner rights and encouraging amateur historical research. Rebecca had testified before congressional committees about the educational value of treasure hunting and the need for policies that supported citizen archaeology while preserving historical sites for future generations. The family that had once faced homelessness now employed 43 people through their various enterprises, but Rebecca insisted that their most important discovery had been learning that desperate circumstances could become doorways to extraordinary opportunities. When families worked together with determination, systematic thinking, and willingness to take calculated risks that conventional wisdom would discourage. Marcus's kidney specialist had recently cleared him for the physically demanding archaeological fieldwork that would be required for his planned career in frontier archaeology, fulfilling the boy's dream of combining his medical recovery with his passion for historical investigation. His research skills had already contributed to discoveries at sites throughout the region, validating his decision to pursue advanced education in archaeological methods and frontier history. Have you ever wondered what secrets might be hidden beneath your own property? What family stories or local legends in your area might contain clues to historical treasures that remain undiscovered? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what state you're watching from. We love hearing from viewers who might have their own treasure-hunting adventures to share. Tomorrow, we've got an incredible story about a retired teacher who discovered Civil War gold in her backyard garden that led to revelations about her town's forgotten role in the Underground Railroad. You won't want to miss how one woman's love of gardening uncovered secrets that changed everything historians thought they knew about her community's past. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our daily stories of ordinary people whose curiosity and determination led to extraordinary discoveries that prove treasure-hunting adventures are still possible for anyone willing to look beyond the surface of everyday life and investigate the mysteries that history has left waiting for the right person to uncover them.